Hello, friends. If this joke tickled your funny bone, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's an easy way to keep the humor flowing into your feed. Don't miss the last one. That is special joke for you.
This fat guy sees an ad for a new gym guaranteeing to reduce anyone's weight by 5, 10, or 20 kilograms on the first day. So he goes and tells them he wants to lose 5 kilograms. They strip him and lead him into a huge gym with all kinds of ropes and parallel bars and ladders and tell him to wait a minute. He's standing there when on the far side of the gym, a door opens and out steps a gorgeous blonde, with a sign saying, "If you catch me, I'm yours." He starts running, and just as he gets close, she starts picking up speed. Before he knows it, he's running all over the gym, up the ladders, down the ladders, across the parallel bars, here and there. And just as he's about to catch the blonde, hop, she disappears through a door. In comes the management, who lead him to the showers and then weigh him. Sure enough, he lost exactly 5 kilograms. He's back on the street and starts to think, Jesus, I was so close to catching her. If I had a little more time. So he races back to the gym and says, I want to lose 20 more kilograms. No problem, says the manager. Again, he strips and is led to the large gym. This time he's standing by the door when it opens. Out comes a gorilla with a sign, "If I catch you, you're mine." This duck walks into a convenience store and asks the clerk, "Do you have any grapes?" The clerk says no, and the duck leaves. The next day, the duck returns and asks, "Do you have any grapes?" The clerk again says no, and the duck leaves. The day after that, the duck walks in the store again and asks, "Do you have any grapes?" The clerk screams at the duck, "You've come in here the past 2 days and asked if we had any grapes. I told you no every time, that we don't have any grapes. I swear, if you come back in here again and ask for grapes, I'll nail your webbed feet to the floor." The duck left and returned the next day. This time he asked, "Do you have any nails?" The clerk replied, "No." And the duck said, "Good. Got any grapes?" This blonde decides one day that she is sick and tired of all these blonde jokes and how all blondes are perceived as stupid. So, she decides to show her husband that blondes really are smart. While her husband is off at work, she decides that she is going to paint a couple of rooms in the house. The next day, right after her husband leaves for work, she gets down to the task at hand. Her husband arrives home and smells the distinctive smell of paint. He walks into the living room and finds his wife lying on the floor in a pool of sweat. He notices that she is wearing a heavy parka and a leather jacket at the same time. He goes over and asks her if she is okay. She replies yes. He asks what she is doing, and she replies that she wanted to prove to him that not all blonde women are dumb and wanted to do it by painting the house. He then asks her why she has a parka over her leather jacket. She replies that she was reading the directions on the paint can, and it said, "For best results, put on 2 coats." Attending a wedding for the first time, a little girl whispered to her mother, "Why is the bride dressed in white?" "Because white is the color of happiness, and today is the happiest day of her life." Her mother tried to explain, keeping it simple. The child thought about this for a moment, then said, "So why? Is the groom wearing black? So there's this man with a parrot. And his parrot swears like a sailor. I mean, he's a pistol. He can swear for 5 minutes straight without repeating himself. The trouble is that the guy who owns the parrot is a quiet, conservative type, and this bird's foul mouth is driving him crazy. One day it gets to be too much, so the guy grabs the bird by the throat, shakes him really hard, and yells, "Quit it!" But this just makes the bird mad, and he swears more than ever. Then the guy gets mad and says, "That's it, I'll get you," and locks the bird in a kitchen cabinet. This really aggravates the bird, and he claws and scratches, and when the guy finally lets him out, the bird cuts loose with a stream of invective that would make a veteran sailor blush. At that point, the guy is so mad that he throws the bird into the freezer. For the first few seconds, there is a terrible din. The bird kicks and claws and thrashes. Then it suddenly goes very quiet. At first, the guy just waits, but then he starts to think that the bird may be hurt. After a couple of minutes of silence, he's so worried that he opens up the freezer door. The bird calmly climbs onto the man's outstretched arm and says, "Awfully sorry about the trouble I gave you. I'll do my best to improve my vocabulary from now on." The man is astounded. He can't understand the transformation that has come over the parrot. Then the parrot says, "By the way, what did the chicken do?" A fellow decides to take off early from work and go drinking. He stays until the bar closes at 2 a.m., at which time he is extremely drunk. When he enters his house, he doesn't want to wake anyone, so he takes off his shoes and starts tiptoeing up the stairs. Halfway up the stairs, he falls over backwards and lands flat on his rear end. That wouldn't have been so bad, except that he had a couple of empty pint bottles in his back pockets, and they broke, and the broken glass carved up his buttocks terribly. But he was so drunk that he didn't know he was hurt. A few minutes later, as he was undressing, he noticed blood, so he checked himself out in the mirror, and sure enough, his behind was cut up something terrible. Well, he repaired the damage as best he could under the circumstances, and he went to bed. The next morning, his head was hurting, and his rear was hurting, and he was hunkering under the covers trying to think up some good story when his wife came into the bedroom. "Well, you really tied one on last night," she said. "Where'd you go?" "I worked late," he said, "and I stopped off for a couple of beers." "A couple of beers? That's a laugh," she replied. "You got plastered last night. Where the heck did you go?" "What makes you so sure I got drunk last night anyway?" "Well," she replied, "my first big clue was when I got up this morning and found a bunch of Band-Aids stuck to the mirror." Everyone was seated around the table as the food was being served. When little Logan received his plate, he started eating right away. "Logan, wait until we say our prayer," his mother reminded him. "I don't have to," the little boy replied. "Of course you do," his mother insisted. "We say a prayer before eating at our house." "That's at our house," Logan explained. "But this is Grandma's house, and she knows how to cook." A little girl asked her mother, "How did the human race come about?" The mother answered, "God made Adam and Eve. They had children, and so all mankind was made." A few days later, the little girl asked her father the same question. The father answered, "Many years ago there were monkeys, and we developed from them." The confused girl returns to her mother and says, "Mom, how is it possible that you told me that the human race was created by God and Papa says we developed from monkeys?" The mother answers, "Well, dear, it is very simple. I told you about the origin of my side of the family, and your father told you about his side." A man walks into a store to buy a Barbie doll for his daughter. "How much is that Barbie in the window?" he asks the shop assistant. In a manner, she responds, "Which Barbie?" "We have Barbie Goes to the Gym for $19.95. Barbie Goes to the Ball for $19.95. Barbie Goes Shopping for $19.95. Barbie Goes to the Beach for $19.95. Barbie Goes Night Clubbing for $19.95. And Divorce Barbie for $395. The guy asks, "Why is Divorce Barbie different from all the others?" "That's obvious," the assistant states. "Divorce Barbie comes with Ken's house, Ken's car, Ken's boat, Ken's furniture." One night, a father passed by his son's room and heard his son praying, "God bless Mommy, Daddy, and Grandma. Ta-ta, Grandpa." The father didn't quite know what this meant, but was glad his son was praying. The next morning, they found Grandpa dead on the floor of a heart attack. The father reassured himself that it was just a coincidence, but was still a bit spooked. The next night, he heard his son praying again. "God bless Mommy and Daddy, Tata Grandma." The father was worried, but decided to wait until morning. Sure enough, the next morning, Grandma was on the floor, dead of a heart attack. Really scared now, the father decided to wait outside his son's door the next night. And sure enough, the boy started to pray, "God bless Mommy, Tata, Daddy." Now the father was crapping his pants. He stayed up all night and went to the doctor's early the next day to make sure his health was fine. When he finally came home, his wife was waiting on the porch. She said, "Thank God you're here. We could really use your help. We found a man dead on our porch this morning." A small boy is sent to bed by his father. 5 minutes later. Dad. What? I'm thirsty. Can you bring me a drink of water? Number, you had your chance. Lights out. 5 minutes later. Odd. What? I'm thirsty. Can I have a drink of water? I told you no. If you ask again, I'll have to spank you. 5 minutes later. Dad. What? When you come in to spank me, can you bring me a drink of water? Jack's mother ran into the bedroom when she heard him scream and found his 2-year-old sister pulling his hair. She gently released the little girl's grip and said comfortingly to Jack, There. She didn't mean it. She doesn't know that hurts." She was barely out of the room when the little girl shouted. Rushing back in, she asked, "What happened?" "She knows now," Jack replied. A police officer pulls over this guy who had been weaving in and out of the lanes. He goes up to the guy's window and says, "Sir, I need you to blow into this breathalyzer tube." The man says, "Sorry, officer, I can't do that. I am an asthmatic. If I do that, I'll have a really bad asthma attack." "Okay, fine. I need you to come down to the station to give a blood sample." "I can't do that either. I am hemophilic. If I do that, I'll bleed to death." "Well, then we need a urine sample." "I'm so sorry, Fefe, sir, I can't do that either. I am also diabetic. If I do that, I'll get really low blood sugar." "All right, then I need you to come out here and walk this white line." "I can't do that, officer." "Why not?" "Because I'm drunk." Two redneck hunters got a pilot to fly them into the far north for elk hunting. They were quite successful in their venture and bagged 6 big bulls. The pilot came back as arranged to pick them up. They started loading their gear into the plane, including the 6 elk, but the pilot objected. He said, "The plane can take out only 4 of your elk. You will have to leave 2 behind." One of the hunters pushed forward. "Hey, last year our pilot let us take out 6 elk. It was the same model plane, same weather conditions and everything. What's with this? We want you to allow us to fly out just like last year." Reluctantly, the pilot finally permitted them to put all 6 elk aboard, and the men all climbed in with their gear. But when they attempted to take off and fly out of the valley, the little plane could not make it. They crashed in the wilderness. Climbing out of the wreckage, one redneck said to the other, "Do you know where we are?" "I think so," replied the other redneck. "Yep, I think this is about 100 yards further along than where we crashed last year." An old man got married, and right after the wedding, he had to move to another country for work. 5 years later, he finally returned home. The moment he walked through the front door, 3 kids came running towards him, shouting, "Daddy!" Completely baffled, the old man stood there in shock. "What is this? Who are these kids?" he asked, scratching his head in confusion. His wife leaned in closer, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "Well," she said, "honey, you went all the way to another country to work for me. While you were off working hard, I figured I'd work hard too. Do you really think I wouldn't do at least this much for you in return?" A blonde goes into a nearby store and asks a clerk if she can buy the TV in the corner. The clerk looks at her and says that he doesn't serve blondes, so she goes back home and dyes her hair black. The next day she returns to the store and asks the same thing, and again the clerk said he doesn't serve blondes. Frustrated, the blonde goes home and dyes her hair yet again to a shade of red. Sure that a clerk would sell her the TV this time, she returns and asks a different clerk this time. To her astonishment, this clerk also says that she doesn't serve blondes. The blonde asks the clerk, "How in the world do you know I am a blonde?" The clerk looks at her disgustedly and says, "That's not a TV or it's a microwave?" An avid duck hunter was in the market for a new bird dog. His search ended when he found a dog that could actually walk on water to retrieve a duck. Shocked by his find, he was sure none of his friends would ever believe him. He decided to try to break the news to a friend of his, the eternal pessimist who refused to be impressed with anything. This surely would impress him. He invited him to hunt with him and his new dog. As they waited by the shore, a flock of ducks flew by. They fired, and a duck fell. The dog responded and jumped into the water. The dog, however, did not sink, but instead walked across the water to retrieve the bird, never getting more than his paws wet. This continued all day long. Each time a duck fell, the dog walked across the surface of the water to retrieve it. The pessimist watched carefully, saw everything, but did not say a single word. On the drive home, the hunter asked his friend, "Did you notice anything unusual about my new dog?" "I sure did," responded the pessimist. "He can't swim." 3 men died in a car accident and met Jesus himself at the pearly gates. The Lord spoke unto them, saying, "I will ask you each a simple question. If you tell the truth, I will allow you into heaven, but if you lie, hell is waiting for you." To the first man the Lord asked, "How many times did you cheat on your wife?" The first man replied, "Lord, I was a good husband. I never cheated on my wife." The Lord replied, "Very good. Not only will I allow you in, but for being faithful to your wife, I will give you a huge mansion and a limo for your transportation." To the second man the Lord asked, "How many times did you cheat on your wife?" The second man replied, "Lord, I cheated on my wife twice." The Lord replied, "I will allow you to come in, but for your unfaithfulness, you will get a 4-bedroom house and a BMW. To the third man, the Lord asked, "So, how many times did you cheat on your wife?" The third man replied, "Lord, I cheated on my wife about 8 times. The Lord replied, "I will allow you to come in, but for your unfaithfulness, you will get a 1-room apartment and a Yugo for your transportation." A couple hours later, the second and third men saw the first man crying his eyes out. "Why are you crying?" the 2 men asked. "You got the mansion and limo." The first man replied, "I'm crying because I saw my wife a little while ago, and she was riding a skateboard." Once upon a time, a little boy called Sam was playing in the yard behind his house. During his pretend fighting game, he knocked over the outhouse. Now Sam was upset and worried that he would get into trouble, so he ran into the woods and didn't come out until after getting dark. When he arrived back home, his pappy was waiting for him. He asked suspiciously, "Son, did you knock over the outhouse this afternoon?" "No, pappy," Sam lied. "Well, let me tell you a story," said the father. "Once, not that long ago, George Washington received a shiny new axe from his father. Excited, he tried it out on a tree, swiftly cutting it down. But as he looked at the tree with dismay, he realized it was his mother's favorite cherry tree. His pappy paused. "Just like you, he ran into the woods. When he returned, his pappy asked, 'George, did you cut down the cherry tree?' George answered with, 'Father, I cannot tell a lie. I did indeed chop down the tree.' Then his father said, 'Well, since you are me, you are spared from punishment. I hope you have learned your lesson, though.' So, Sam's father asked a guy again, 'Do you knock down the outhouse?' 'Pappy, I cannot tell a lie anymore,' said the little boy. 'I did indeed knock down the outhouse.' Then his pappy father spanked Sam boy, red, white, and blue. The boy whimpered, 'Pappy, I told you the truth. Why did you spank me?' Pappy answered, That's because George Washington's father wasn't in the tree when he chopped it down. Harold's wife bought a new line of expensive cosmetics guaranteed to make her look years younger. After a lengthy sitting before the mirror, applying the miracle products, she asked, "Darling, honestly, what age would you say I am?" Looking over her carefully, Harold replied, "Judging from your skin, 20, your hair 18, and your figure 25. "Oh, you flatterer," she gushed. "Hey, wait a minute," Harold interrupted. "I haven't added them up yet." A drunk phoned police to report that thieves had been in his car. "They've stolen the dashboard, the steering wheel, the brake pedal, even the accelerator," he cried out. However, before the police investigation could start, the phone rang a second time, with the same voice coming over the line. "Never mind," he said with a hiccup. "I got in the back seat by mistake." An elderly gentleman is standing at the pearly gates, and St. Peter addresses him. "All you need to have done is one good deed, and we will allow you passage into heaven." The old man says, "No problem," as he recounts to St. Peter that he once stopped at an intersection and saw a motorcycle gang harassing a young woman. He got out of his car, walked up to one of the bikers, who was over 7 feet tall and must have weighed nearly 400 pounds, and told the biker that abusing and harassing a woman is a cowardly act and that he would not tolerate it in his presence. He then reached up, yanked out his nose ring, and kicked him in the groin to make his point. St. Peter is frantically searching the man's life in his book in front of him and says, "I can't find that incident anywhere in your file." "When did that happen?" The old man looks down at his watch and says, "Oh, about 5 minutes ago." 3 friends die in a car crash and they find themselves at the gates of heaven. Before entering, they are each asked a question by St. Peter himself. "When you are in your casket and friends and family are mourning you, what would you like to hear them say about you?" asks St. Peter. The first guy says, "I would like to hear them say that I was a great doctor and a great family man." The second guy says, "I would like to hear that I was a wonderful husband and school teacher who made a huge difference in our children." The last guy replies, "I would like to hear them say, 'Look, he's moving.'" Sam and Becky are celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. Sam says to Becky, "Becky, I was wondering, have you ever cheated on me?" Becky replies, "Oh, Sam, why would you ask such a question now?" "You don't want to ask that question." "Yes, Becky, I really want to know. Please." "Well, all right. Yes, 3 times." "3? Well, when were they?" he asked. "Well, Sam, remember when you were 35 years old and you really wanted to start the business on your own and no bank would give you a loan? Remember then one day the bank president himself came over the house and signed the loan papers. No questions asked? Oh, Becky, you did that for me. I respect you even more than ever to do such a thing for me. So, when was number 2? Well, Sam, remember when you had that last heart attack and you were needing that very tricky operation and no surgeon would touch you? Then remember how Dr. DeBakey came all the way up here to do the surgery himself, and then you were in good shape again? I can't believe it. Becky, you should do such a thing for me to save my life. I couldn't have a more wonderful wife. To do such a thing, you must really love me, darling. I couldn't be more moved. So, all right then. When was number 3? Well, Sam, remember a few years ago when you really wanted to be president of the golf club and you were 17 votes short? An old priest got sick of everyone in his parish confessing adultery. During one Sunday's sermon, he told them, "If one more person confesses to adultery, I'll quit." Since everyone liked him, they decided to use a code word, fallen. From then on, anyone who had committed adultery said they had fallen. This satisfied the old priest and the parishioners, and everything was fine for years, until finally the old priest passed away at the ripe old age of 93. Shortly after the new young priest settled in, he paid a call on the mayor. The priest was quite concerned. "You have to do something about the sidewalks in this town, Mayor. You can't believe how many people come into the confessional talking about having fallen." The mayor started to laugh, realizing that no one had explained their code word to the new priest. But before the mayor could explain, the priest shook his finger at the mayor and said, "I don't know why you're laughing. Your wife fell 3 times last week." An elderly couple were driving across the country. The woman was driving when she got pulled over by the highway patrol. The officer said, "Ma'am, did you know you were speeding?" The woman, hard of hearing, turns to her husband and asks, "What did he say?" The old man yells, "He says you were speeding." The patrolman says, "May I see your license?" The woman turns to her husband and asks again, "What did he say?" The old man yells, "He wants to see your license." The woman gave the officer her license. The patrolman says, "I see you are from Arkansas." "I spent some time there once and went on a blind date with the ugliest woman I've ever seen." The woman turned to her husband and asked, "What did he say?" And the old man yells, "He said he knows you." Our teacher asked what my favorite animal was, and I said a friend chicken. She said I wasn't funny, but she couldn't have been right because everyone else laughed. My parents always told me to tell the truth, so I did, but my teacher sent me to the principal's office for it. I told the principal what happened. He laughed, but then told me not to do that again. The next day, my teacher asked me what my favorite live animal was. I told her it was chicken. She asked me why, and I told her because you can make it into a friend chicken. She sent me to the principal's office again. He laughed, but told me not to do that again. I don't understand. My parents taught me to be honest, but my teacher doesn't like when I am. I decided to follow what my parents taught me because they always tell me all they want for me is to become a good man, and a good man never lies. Today, my teacher asked me what famous person I admired the most. I said, Colonel Sanders. Guess where I am now? An Illinois man left the snow-filled streets of Chicago for a vacation in Florida. His wife was on a business trip and was planning to meet him there the next day. When he reached his hotel, he decided to send his wife a quick email. Unable to find the scrap of paper on which he had written her email address, he did his best to type it in from memory. Unfortunately, he missed one letter, and his note was directed instead to an elderly preacher's wife, whose husband had passed away only the day before. When the grieving widow checked her email, she took one look at the monitor, let out a piercing scream, and fell to the floor in a dead faint. At the sound, her family rushed into the room and saw this note on the screen: "Dearest wife, just got checked in. Everything prepared for your arrival today. Sure is hot down here." It was the end of the school year, and a kindergarten teacher was receiving gifts from her pupils. The florist's son handed her a gift. She shook it, held it overhead, and said, "I bet I know what it is. Flowers." "That's right," the boy said, "but how did you know?" "Oh, just a wild guess," she said. The next pupil was the sweet shop owner's daughter. The teacher held her gift overhead, shook it, and said, "I bet I can guess what it is, a box of sweets." "That's right, but how did you know?" asked the girl. "Oh, just a wild guess," said the teacher. The next gift was from the son of the liquor store owner. The teacher held the package overhead, but it was leaking. She touched a drop of the leakage with her finger and put it to her tongue. "Is it wine?" she asked. "No," the boy replied with some excitement. The teacher repeated the process, tasting a larger drop of the leakage. "Is it champagne?" she asked. "No," the boy replied with more excitement. The teacher took one more big taste before declaring, "I give up, what is it?" With great glee, the boy replied, "It's a puppy. Surprise!" 3 strings walk into a bar and sit down at a table. The first string walks up to the bartender and says, "Bartender, 3 beers, please." The bartender looks at the string and says, "I'm sorry, but we don't serve strings here." Disappointed, the string walks back to his buddies and explains, The second string says, "No problem, I'll go get our beers." The second string walks up to the bartender and says, "Bartended beers, please." The bartender says, "Listen, man, I told your buddy that we don't serve strings here." Empty-handed, the second string walks back to his buddies. The third string says, "No problem. Tie me in a knot at one end and fray my ends at the other." He struts up to the bartender and says, "Bartender, 3 beers, please." The bartender proceeds to get him the beer when he suspiciously turns to look at the string and says, "Excuse me, but are you a string?" The string replies, "I'm afraid not."
If you're still here, I'm thrilled you enjoyed the joke. Subscribing is a simple way to stay connected. Join our community and make me a happy friend.